Coming up on KCCI 8 News Close-Up, our exclusive one-on-one interview with former Vice President Mike Pence. He's back in Iowa and may have a decision on if he's running for president, when he'll make an official announcement, and what it could mean to run against his former boss, Donald Trump. And groups of rioters were looking to attack Mike Pence as they stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. What the former vice president says he'd tell the 8 Iowans charged for their actions that day. And more Republicans are officially jumping into the race. Now official candidates, House Senator Tim Scott and Governor Ron DeSantis, plan to sway Iowans over to their campaigns.
This is Iowa's news leader. This is KCCI 8 News Close Up.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us for Close Up. I'm Chief Political Reporter Amanda Rooker. Well, former Vice President Mike Pence was back in Iowa last week, his latest visit to the first caucus state of the 2024 campaign. Now, he's not officially a candidate, but in an exclusive one-on-one interview, he tells me he does have a clear sense of calling on his 2024 plans, and he says when he'll share that decision with Iowans. Well, we will start with the elephant in the room. You've spent lots of time in Iowa. You've hinted at a possible run for the presidency, and last time you were here, last month, you said that any serious contender needs to get into the race by the end of June. Have you made a decision, even if you're not ready to announce, have you made a decision on whether or not you'll run for president?
Well, we don't have anything to announce today in Iowa, but I will tell you that we've had an awful lot of encouragement, not just in this trip, but as we've traveled around the country. Look, I think this country's in a lot of trouble. And I'm hearing from people that long to see us return to the policies that we were advancing, that had the American economy growing, strengthened our military, secured our border, stood by our liberties and our values. But I also hear a real desire for new leadership, leadership that would maybe restore a threshold of civility in public life. And I'm always humbled that people associate my approach to politics with that. So we're listening, and I promise you that before the 4th of July is here, that you'll know what our intentions are here in Iowa and across the country.
So it could be past the end of June.
No, I really do believe that anyone that's serious about pursuing the Republican nomination for president should make their intentions known before the end of June, and I'm confident that people of Iowa will know what Karen and I believe our calling is before then, and I promise to keep you posted.
Is that most of it for you? I know when we've talked about this before, you've mentioned that you're listening and you want to take time to listen to the people of Iowa and the rest of the country, but what are the things that you're still figuring out? Is it prayer? Is it a calling? Are there unanswered questions that you still need to figure out before you make a decision?
Well, I would tell you, I think we have a clear sense of our calling, and while we're not prepared to make any announcement at this time, I've just been deeply moved as people look at my career, not just as vice president, but as governor of a state that works, a state that balanced budgets and expanded educational choice and stood for the sanctity of life. And my years in Congress, when we sometimes took on leaders of our own party battling to stop runaway spending in both political parties. And so we've been very moved by that, very moved by the confidence that's been expressed in us. And in the days ahead, I promise to let you know what our plans will be. And but in the meantime, it's frankly always great to be back in Iowa.
Talking about Iowa, if you were to announce a presidential run, what role would Iowa play in your campaign?
Well, look, Iowa is first in the nation. Iowa's always played an outsized role in shaping the leadership of both political parties. Sadly, that won't be true in this election, and I think that's a great loss for the Democratic Party. I think Iowa, like I think my home state of Indiana, really is the heart of the heartland. Good, hardworking people that represent the very best of this country, that understand the broad range of this economy, both in the city and on the farm. And also, my sense of Iowa is that the people of Iowa take that responsibility to heart. And I'm very confident that Iowa is once again going to do their part. They're going to choose the right standard bearer for our party and set our party on a path to victory in 2024.
Talking a little bit more about if you choose to run for president, and talking about that here in Iowa, a very significant, large group of Iowa Republicans are Iowa evangelicals. They played a large role in 2016. In 2016, Iowa evangelicals made up almost 2/3 of Republican caucus goers here in Iowa. But the latest Des Moines Register poll, granted it's in March, it's the latest one, it shows that nearly 40% of Iowa evangelicals view you unfavorably. How do you plan to change the minds of that group of people?
You know, one of the things I've learned in the last 2 years is that I'm well known, but I'm not known well. I mean, people in Indiana know me as a conservative congressman fighting for fiscal discipline and traditional values, serving in Republican leadership in the House, the first time we defeated Nancy Pelosi. They also know me as a governor, as a chief executive that balanced budgets, cut taxes, set record employment in Indiana, and expanded educational choice, doubling the program that we had founded in our state years earlier. They knew that we'd taken strong stands for life and religious liberty. But I accept that most Americans just know me as vice president. And you know, I was always loyal to President Donald Trump. I understood the role of the vice president was to stand beside the president and to support the policies of the administration. Wherever the president and I had a difference, I would share them with him in private, but ultimately respect his decision. And until the end of the administration, there was no public difference between us. But in that sense, I think most Americans see me in that role as vice president and a loyal lieutenant. I expect, should we become a candidate for the Republican nomination, we'll have a chance for people to learn about all of our background, all of our experiences, and the vision and the values that have driven us through public life.
Still to come on Close Up, Mike Pence was once former President Donald Trump's right-hand man. When our one-on-one interview continues, what the former vice president says sets him apart from his former boss. And Pence was the intended target of many of the rioters who attacked the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. What the former vice president would tell those rioters now. Welcome back to Close Up. Mike Pence is expected to announce his 2024 plans by the end of June. But for him, jumping into the race for president means also competing against his former boss, Donald Trump. I asked the former vice president what now sets him apart from Trump. Pence worked closely with the former president during their time in the White House until he ultimately refused Trump's calls to overturn the results of the 2020 election and became the intended target for many who stormed the U.S. Capitol. I asked Pence for his response as Trump continues to publicly call January 6th a beautiful day. Right now, the current frontrunner for the GOP nomination, your former running mate, former President Donald Trump, you served alongside him for 4 years. So when people think about who you are and they associate you with the Trump administration, how do you set yourself apart from Donald Trump?
Well, if we were to enter the campaign for the Republican nomination, I would begin by saying I'm very proud of the record of our administration. Historic tax cuts, historic investments in our armed forces. We secured our border. We reduced illegal immigration by 90%. We appointed conservatives to our courts. We gave America a new beginning for the right to life with 3 appointments to the Supreme Court of the United States. But elections are always about the future. And for my part, I believe America is the leader of the free world. We need to continue to be the arsenal of democracy. We need to continue to provide support for the courageous Ukrainian military until they repel the Russian invasion. My former running mate's taken a different view of that, and on that we would differ. I also hold the view that one of the great challenges in this generation is that we have a national debt the size of our nation's economy for the first time since World War II. Now, Joe Biden's policy is insolvency. He says that we won't even talk about reforming Social Security and Medicare for even younger Americans. Even though those programs are 70% of federal spending. And I became a grandfather 3 times over in the last 2 years. I just can't look at those 3 beautiful little granddaughters and say to them, this national debt is your problem. I think we need to produce leadership in this country that will be straight with the American people about the debt crisis that we're facing now and in the future, and offer common sense reforms that will preserve Social Security and Medicare for younger Americans and keep our promises to seniors. I know that Joe Biden's policies, we're not even going to talk about it, and my old running mate's taken the same position Joe Biden has. I think the American people deserve better. And should I become a candidate for president, we'll be drawing that contrast on policies at home and abroad.
I want to turn to talk to you a little bit about January 6th. I know it's something that you have written about in your book, you've talked about in countless interviews, and you've acknowledged the dangers that you potentially could have faced that day, that there were rioters that were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." But I want to talk to you about comments from former President Donald Trump made just a few weeks ago at a CNN town hall. He said it was a beautiful day. He maintains that. What's your response to that?
January 6th was not a beautiful day. It was a tragic day. But thanks to the courage of law enforcement, the riot was quelled, and we reconvened the House and the Senate on the very same day. And we completed our work under the Constitution of the United States. And I'll always believe that we did our duty that day under the Constitution. Now that's not to say I didn't share the concern of millions of Americans about irregularities in the election. I fully supported all of the lawsuits that raised those issues in the courts in the country. But once Iowa, once Indiana, once every state in the country had certified the results of the election, I believe the duty of the Congress was clear. And as I said, by God's grace, with my family at my side that day, I'll always believe that we did our duty.
Talking about the Iowa-specific piece to January 6th, there was one Iowa man, Doug Jensen, who was seen on video walking through the U.S. Capitol, leading rioters just a throwing distance away from you. Your own security detail testified against Jensen in court. If you had the opportunity to talk to Doug Jensen or any of the 7 other Iowans who were charged for their actions on that day, what would you tell them?
I believe in due process of law. I said that day in a Twitter statement that the violence needed to stop and people needed to leave the Capitol, and that those who failed to do so should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and I still believe that. Look, what happened on January 6th was tragic, and we can never allow it to happen again. I mean, to think that in the very citadel of our democracy, we saw the kind of rioting and violence and vandalism that we saw is just utterly unacceptable. Now, I stand by the due process rights of every American, the right to make their own case in court. And in my heart, I'm a forgiving man, but I do believe that it's important that the people that engaged in violence, particularly against law enforcement officers, be held to account in the law.
Still to come on Close Up, 2 more Republicans have officially entered the presidential race. My one-on-one interview with Mike Pence continues with his thoughts on the growing field of GOP contenders. Welcome back to Close Up. Thanks for joining us. Well, earlier we heard Mike Pence say Iowans can expect to hear his official 2024 plans by the end of next month. But already there are 9 declared Republican candidates in the race for president. Just hours before Ron DeSantis announced his White House bid, I asked Pence for his thoughts on the Florida governor, who many see as former President Trump's closest competitor. Ron DeSantis is expected to make a presidential announcement on Twitter. What are your thoughts on him entering the race?
Well, I wish him well. It's a free country, and I have to tell you that one of the great privileges that I had in my life was serving as governor of Indiana. But also, even during the difficult days early days of the COVID pandemic, when I worked with all 50 governors around the country, literally every single week, in trying to implement policies that would make sure that our families and our businesses and our healthcare workers were able to see their way through that. So I welcome any governor in America into this debate. I welcome other leaders into this debate, and as I said, I wish him and Casey well.
Ron DeSantis has seemingly also pitched himself as a new direction for the Republican Party, as seemingly the best alternative to Donald Trump. How would you differentiate yourself from someone like Ron DeSantis?
Well, I think if I became a candidate, I think that'd be up to voters. It's a privilege for me to have served in leadership in the Congress. Served for 12 years. I know members of the House and Senate. I know how to get things done. We got an awful lot done in those first 2 years that we had Republican majorities in the House and Senate. I've been a governor. I understand how state government works, but I also had the great privilege of participating in the foreign policy of our country, traveling around the world and representing the United States. And should we become a candidate, we'll certainly reflect on all of the experience, because I do think the challenges that our country's facing today call for experience. I mean, we've got to bring our very best effort. Joe Biden has literally weakened America at home and abroad, from the disastrous withdrawal in Afghanistan, the capitulation to Iran. I think it's emboldened the enemies of freedom around the world. And here at home, runaway spending has launched the worst inflation in 40 years. Their policies set forth the worst border crisis our nation has ever experienced. Gasoline prices had gone through the roof from their war on energy. And all of that, I truly do believe, calls for men and women of experience who are able to step forward and turn this country around. But the great news is, one of the things we proved in the early days of our administration was when you have those Republican majorities, and when you have a clear vision, let people keep more of what they earn, secure our border, support our military, appoint conservatives to our courts, America comes roaring back, and I believe it will again soon.
Well, Mike Pence has long been a supporter of education reform to use taxpayer dollars to help some families pay for their students' private school tuition. I asked the former vice president whether private school scholarship programs like the one recently passed here in Iowa should be supported at a federal level.
During your latest trip to Des Moines, you spent some time at Des Moines Christian schools. You've been an ardent supporter of school choice policies. Iowa just passed one. What's your suggestion at a federal level? Should there be any sort of policy encouraging school choice nationwide?
Well, let me say I couldn't be more proud of Governor Kim Reynolds and the Republicans in the state legislature for making history and extending educational choice to every family in this state. I believe it's going to change education for generations, and I think it's going to strengthen private education and public schools. Here in America, we understand that competition makes everybody better. And I think that now that Indiana, Iowa, Arizona, other states around the country are expanding school choice to every family, regardless of income and area code, is truly historic. With regard to the federal government's role, I will tell you candidly, I'm someone who believes the Federal Department of Education should be closed down. We ought to block grant all of those federal resources back to the states to promote exactly the kind of education innovation. I mean, education is a state and local function. And under the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, those powers that are not literally given to the federal government are reserved to the states. And I'll always hold the view that when it comes to education, when it comes to public safety, we need to preserve the states' rights and abilities to innovate. And so I'll continue to hold that view. But if I'm ever working in Washington, D.C. again, you bet, so long as there's a Federal Department of Education, we'll do our part to try and encourage policies that will promote more educational and parental choice here in Iowa and all across the country.
And Mike Pence returns to Iowa next week. He'll take part in a live town hall Wednesday, June 7th at 8 p.m. That takes place on the Grandview University campus here in Des Moines, and it will air live on CNN. A week from today, GOP presidential candidate Nikki Haley also returns to Iowa for her own town hall that will also air live on CNN. And former President Donald Trump is also planning a return to Iowa next week. He'll make an appearance Thursday morning at the West Side Conservative Club at Machine Shed in Urbandale ahead of a town hall that night hosted by Fox News in Clive. Now, Trump had planned to hold a rally at Waterworks Park May 13th, but that was canceled due to the threat of severe weather. Now, two of Pence's fellow Republicans officially entered the presidential race last week. Ahead on Close Up, what Tim Scott and Ron DeSantis are doing to try and sway Iowa voters. Welcome back to Close Up. Well, former Vice President Mike Pence is still debating whether to enter the presidential race. Two of his fellow Republicans, Senator Tim Scott and Governor Ron DeSantis, officially launched their campaigns last week. After Scott launched his candidacy in his home state of South Carolina, he traveled back to Iowa last Wednesday. Scott toured Siouxland Christian School in Sioux City, and he plans to return to Iowa Friday. He'll hold a town hall in Council Bluffs with Iowa Congressman Randy Feenstra. And Florida Governor Ron DeSantis launched his campaign Wednesday on Twitter. The DeSantis campaign also released this 1-minute-long campaign ad on their social media site. DeSantis is planning to make several campaign stops here in Iowa this week. Tuesday, DeSantis plans to visit West Des Moines, holding a rally at the Mid-American Recplex from 6 until 8 that night. Then he'll make stops in Sioux City, Council Bluffs, Pella, and Cedar Rapids before ultimately heading to New Hampshire and South Carolina. Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close Up. We'll see you back here next Sunday. Have a great day.